Anyway. Okay, so here is what we got to throw up into the air, and then we're going to bring on Molly. Shit. I forgot to play the intro. Now we don't have time for it. It doesn't matter. It's Friday.
That's where I thought we were going before we went into that stuff.
I know.
I was orchestrating the show in my mind, Frank.
I should have just...
You should have read my mind. That's what you should have done.
I just started riffing, and then...
I got really excited.
All went to hell.
Should we just sing the theme song?
Yeah, no. Here's from New York Post.
Okay.
Scientists find clue. After all these years, scientists finally find a clue to slowing Alzheimer's symptoms down. But guess what got in the way? Research has been caught up in Trump's funding delays.
I should have known. It's always Trump's fault.
It was Trump. All these years that we've been trying to figure out what the hell is the key to cancer, to Alzheimer's, to Parkinson's, all that stuff. We finally had a clue, and then Trump delayed it for a couple of months.
So in other words, ironically enough, Joe Biden could have solved Alzheimer's.
He could have.
Okay, just want to make sure that we understand that. Okay.
So listen to how this is written. Again, New York Post by way of the Associated Press. Associated Press is absolutely crazy. An experimental treatment appears to delay Alzheimer's symptoms in some people genetically destined to get the disease in their 40s and 50s.
So I have a huge issue with that just right out of the gate, but continue.
That's what I'm talking about right there, 40s and 50s. According to new findings from ongoing research now caught up in Trump administration funding delays.
Good Lord.
The early results, a scientific first, were published Wednesday, even as study participants worried that politics could cut their access to possible lifeline. First of all, if some lab was on the brink of breaking this thing wide open, money would flow in from everywhere, from pharmaceutical companies, from universities with massive endowments, as it should be, period. The way it should be, whenever you have something that you want to fund, that's the way it should be. But here we are, and again, it's so weak. The claim is so weak. Let's just keep going a little bit here. Now 50 years old, this guy Heinrichs has been treated in that study for more than a decade and remains symptom-free despite inheriting an Alzheimer-causing gene.
Wait, can you scroll? Is this the guy, the picture?
This is the guy.
Okay. All right.
Okay? He's got, I guess that's his son on the couch over there.
Okay.
And he's symptom-free, although inheriting an Alzheimer-causing gene that killed his father and brother around the same age.
Did they identify the gene, by the way, in that?
Let's see.
I'm just curious.
If funding is blocked, how much time do we have? Asked his wife. It's all very, very dramatic. Two drugs sold in the U.S. can modestly slow the worsening early stage Alzheimer's by clearing the brain of one of its hallmarks, sticky gunk called amyloid.
Beta. Yeah,
amyloid.
I knew it. This model is so broken, and this is why we haven't had an FDA approved drug since like 2004, because they're still working on this amyloid beta theory, and it's just not correct.
Sticky gunk.
Yeah.
The new findings center on a subset of 22 participants who receive amyloid-removing drugs, the longest on average 8 years. Now, as far as the gene,
It's okay if it's not there. I can look it up after. I was just curious if they identified it.
Well, and this is what comes around. This is why I wanted to bring on Molly, and I wanted us all to talk, because this opens it up. Alzheimer's is one of those things where, I mean, it is a dementia, Alzheimer's, it's a soul crusher. Anytime a family member or someone you love, someone you know is sick with anything, and it's serious, and it might be the end for them, just outside of that category of disease, it's terrible. But there's a special kind of burden to seeing somebody losing their cognition, everything.
Yeah.
And so obviously it's of great importance for people for things like this to be figured out. But like everything else that we deal with, whether it's talking about how much salt can somebody consume, or is red meat going to cause cancer for everybody, or this, that, and the other thing, it's always about pushing a drug or continuing to find a way to pump billions into new studies that push and kick the can another 10 to 25 years down the road, but nobody seems to be getting healthier.
No. And that's the whole thing, Frank. If you look at someone like Bruce Ames, who was a researcher who identified something called the triage theory, which you have to just look at this from a 30,000 foot point of view. Do we think that since organisms are set up for survival, all organisms, Bruce Ames would say, if the organism is stripped of nutrients or things that it needs to run vital processes, it's going to prioritize the vital process and then allow other things to sort of, that may not kill the organism, but allow the things to kind of work in the background. It will divert resources towards only the essentials. It makes perfect sense. We see that in animals. We see that in every living species. What's fascinating to me is they're trying to convince you, even at the outset, that there is some kind of a gene, specific gene that causes Alzheimer's. It's just not true. They can find genes that may be associated with a higher prevalence of X, Y, or Z disease, but all that means is that that gene has been likely put into an unfortunate modern environment. And we can see that. The reason I ask is I bet they're looking at something called APOE4. I don't know. I haven't read the study, but I can certainly check it out. And they tend to say, oh, that leads to Alzheimer's. It's not true. Otherwise, it would lead to it in everybody. It could predispose somebody, and they may be uniquely susceptible to the modern environment, whether that's EMF, whether that's nutritional environment, whether that is lack of sunlight, whatever it is. So I just think I reject the premise that there is an inevitability to these diseases. We've just normalized disease because, as you said, we're sitting around waiting for a, quote, cure to come from a pharmaceutical company instead of realizing that we're putting the body into an unnatural position and the body is just responding appropriately to that unnatural position.
It's, the hamster wheel. It's the same hamster wheel that we see really saying it presents itself all over the place.
Yeah.
And in this particular thing, this is why I wanted to bring our friend Molly on tonight. And Molly just joined us, Molly Rucker of KetoBrainz.com. Molly, how you feeling?
Doing good.
Oh, wait, hold on a second. I got
Friday, guys.
Yeah, it's a happy Friday to you. Now, Jay, I actually met Molly through Jay.
That's right.
Because I met Keto Brainz through Jay as well. So it's good. It's so good to have you on tonight.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on.
Molly, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I love it. I love these connections that come about in these very random ways in this community. And I couldn't be happier for this one. So thank you both.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and I'm grateful for the whole darn thing. But I'll tell you, for as random as things are, there's other things that just make a lot of sense. And of course, you coming from a line of work that deals directly with nutrients that really help the brain, and here we have this story coming out of Associated Press that is it's published to push one particular line of thinking here, and that is, oh my gosh, the wheels of government have ground to a halt, and the only way we were ever going, which is of course the only way we're going to cure disease or learn more about the body or nourish ourselves correctly, and of course here's Alzheimer's. And this is something I've talked to Jay about before, Molly, and he was the first one that I heard refer to this as type 3 diabetes. And lo and behold, just from being very well acquainted with your brand, published on your blog, there it is again. It is type 3 diabetes. This was from earlier on in the month. Is dementia type 3 diabetes? And I would love to hear you guys talk a little bit about this. Why, Jay or Molly, whoever wants to take it first, what is this about? How does this have a particular tie into the talk about diabetes, which is usually about sugar and insulin and all that stuff? Maybe Jay, you started off, and then Molly, you jump in whenever you want.
Yep.
Yeah. So, essentially what they identified early on was some degree of glucose hypometabolism. So the brain does run on some degree of glucose, although that's now starting to be, it's starting to be challenged in the medical literature in terms of how much glucose the brain actually requires, because ketones, often referred to as an alternative fuel source, really are just an additional fuel source to the brain. So we really don't know what the brain prefers, quote unquote. I don't even like that term because it kind of denotes that like the brain is a person that has a preference. It's really just biochemistry. But as your blood sugar levels tend to increase over time and the cells become less responsive to the signals of insulin, which control glucose in the blood, the brain is shut off, starved from that energy source, glucose. And if your body hasn't learned how to use ketones, which are a byproduct of mobilizing fat for fuel, then your brain essentially is starved for nutrients, and the neuronal networks start to collapse and everything falls apart. And incidentally, that's also where beta amyloid comes into play. And there's plenty of evidence that shows ketone bodies can actually help clear amyloid beta. So again, if you're putting the brain in an unnatural state where it's relying on sugar constantly, it makes sense then that at the end of the day, you're going to have some kind of an issue. And since we know that type 3 diabetes or Alzheimer's is some level of glucose hypometabolism, that's where we end up. And that's where I think the Keto Brainz product is so fantastic, because a lot of our sugar ends up going in our coffee in the morning and starting off the day that way. And you really don't need that at all when you're using Keto Brainz. But I'll turn it over to Molly.
There's so much to that story. Just to start, when I first took a look at it, of course, there's hundreds of different articles, and all they're doing is saying the exact same thing as the first. And just really quick, the first thing that drove me nuts on that is years ago, 20 plus years ago, I read about the nun study, and you guys may have already covered it, so apologies.
I don't think so.
But when it comes to the beta amyloid plaques, part of the problem is, so they took these nuns, and there's like 900 and something of them, and they track them over a lifetime, and all of these nuns give their brains over to research at the end of their life. So the researchers can try to correlate the amount of the beta amyloid plaques with their cognitive function at the time of death. And as far as I understand, after years of looking at all of this, like, you can have a ton of beta amyloid and die at 104 with perfect cognitive function, or you can have low beta amyloid or next to none and die in your 60s of complications from Alzheimer's. So while the beta amyloid plaque hypothesis, there's some connection there, like the fact that they're even trying to make a case for being upset that research money is potentially going away for something that has largely been debunked as the primary cause is insane to begin with. On the the brain metabolism side, I'm going to mess up the numbers, but when it comes to the glucose versus ketones, your brain requires less oxygen when running on ketones versus the glucose to begin with. So we already have a case to be made for a higher quality fuel substrate when you are running on ketones, or as Jay alluded to, if you are a body that can switch between substrates and you can run on glucose or ketone bodies, you have a brain that is better at functioning in a hybrid mode.
Yeah.
And to his point on Keto Brainz, the C8-MCT, which is the base of the product, that C8-MCT is one of the triglycerides from coconut oil, the caprylic acid, that does the best job of stimulating the liver's production of ketone bodies, helping those who are in ketosis or not in ketosis have a bump of ketones to give the brain an opportunity to actually have that secondary fuel substrate. And separate from that, you, of course, have the alpha-glycerylphosphocholine, which is one of the best forms of choline for crossing the blood-brain barrier to increase production of the neuromodulator, which is the neuromodulator of focus in mammals. So acetylcholine, irrespective of a disease state, whether you have dementia, Alzheimer's, you're just brain fog, whatever, you cannot have focus as a mammal without adequate acetylcholine. And there's a whole discussion around that, because you could say, well, what if I just eat eggs? Eggs have choline, and then my body's going to know to take the choline from the eggs, and we're going to make more acetylcholine. Yes, and do you know what suite of genetic mutations you have in the MTHFR realm, or the PEMT realm, or COMT? Because for instance, myself and a large, portion of the population, genetically, I am not as good at taking choline and making acetylcholine due to a number of mutations, all of which are very easy to dial in and fix once you have them. So there are so many people who think, oh, I get this a lot, and I got this a lot all of my years working in this industry. People come to you and they say, I don't know what's wrong. I'm doing everything right, but I feel horrible.
Yeah.
So I kind of try to be gracious and say, well, if you were doing everything right, perhaps you wouldn't feel horrible. So looking at that, you have people who think they're feeding themselves correctly. They're doing everything right? Whether it's they think being vegan is the right way or being this is the right way. And they haven't haven't taken a deep enough dive into their own personal physiology or genetics and really asked themselves what would work. And I think that's why we find so many people respond so strongly and immediately to the ingredients in Keto Brainz and to the amounts of the ingredients in Keto Brainz, because I think so many people's brains have been starved, not only of ketones, but of the essential fats and lipids for a brain that functions in optimal fashion. And yeah, that's where Keto Brainz came from my morning stack.
Well, see, now, Jay, I understand why you said, because I remember one of the first questions I had for Jay, Molly, back in like September or October of 2023 when I first tried it. I said, well, is this going to break my fast? He said, technically, but... And then,
yes.
and he said, like, everything you're talking about there, where you say whether you're in ketosis or not, what it does to. So it's one of those things that I feel like I'm cheating a little bit when I have it in the middle of a fast, and I just don't care as much. But to get into something a little bit more specific on this stuff here, what you were just saying about the beta amyloids and people living with high levels of it, but being perfectly functional on a cognitive level, and those who are low in it that might have suffered a lot of degeneration in their brain and whatnot. It reminds me of all of these false correlation studies about cholesterol.
Exactly where I was going to go.
Okay, so talk a little bit about that, because of course, we're talking cholesterol, we're talking about fats, we're talking about the brain. I mean, there's MCT oil and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Well, I mean, Molly did a great job of breaking that down. The thing is, it is just associational, and that's really the problem, right? That we see. There was a fantastic set of data coming from the Get With the Guidelines American Heart Association, where they were looking at the specifically LDL levels of people hospitalized that had myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, and they put this sort of spread of data out. And what it showed was that there was no rhyme or reason to it. In other words, people that had LDL levels of 250, which would give most cardiologists a heart attack, these people were having heart attacks, but they were having just as many, if not or less heart attacks than people who had LDL levels of 60 or 50. And in fact, the people that had the most heart attacks in this group had an LDL level of 90, which is well below what they say is the quote unquote acceptable normal range. So what that tells you is that there's really no correlation. And what Molly was saying is we're looking in the wrong place, which is why there has been no FDA approved drug for Alzheimer's, because they're all targeting this beta amyloid model. And the truth is that this is probably...
There's no money in lowering carbohydrates.
Exactly.
There's no drug at the end of a trial funded to see what would happen if people reduced carbohydrates and got metabolically healthy. So it's like with Dave Feldman and the research he's doing on lean mass hyperresponders. Mm-hmm. All of the studies that he and Nick are doing, they have to be self-funded because they're not looking for a drug. They're looking for information that will actually help people live better.
You see, and that's the basis of this. That's the basis of this ridiculously petty piece from the Associated Press, is that, oh man, we had, after all these years of studying Alzheimer's, we have this clue. We had this clue, and then the government funding stopped for a little while, and now what? The clue's gone? I don't understand. It's like if there was really an answer to be had there, people would open up their wallets and give to a GoFundMe. Forget about these gigantic universities with their endowments and pharmaceutical companies who actually may give a rip about actually curing diseases or anything else like that. But to Molly's point.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think Molly, you were also saying, isn't the only, I think caprylic acid, C8 in the MCT chain, I think that's the only fatty acid that can also, or the only MCT that can actually cross the blood-brain barrier as well, if I'm correct on that. And
I'm trying to remember, I know I have the name not wrong. It's not Dale Bresnan, but there was the woman researcher like 20 years ago when first coconut oil was okay. And then MCT oil came out and we were selling that where I worked. And I forget the gal's name, but she was a researcher whose husband had
Mary
Alzheimer's.
Newport.
Yes, Mary Newport. So her,
you guys are nerds.
That's
why we get along so well.
I have her baseball card.
Anyone? I have no one in my life who wants to hear any of this shit.
We want to hear it.
I know it's amazing. But so she had, and I'm gonna gum up the story. Apologies. And Jay, you can help me out where I mess up. But she had found out that the MCT oil had brought back some cognitive function in her husband. And at some point, she was able to gain access to like early research exogenous ketones, like way before HVMN originally had ketone esters and way before Dom D'Agostino was talking about them.
Right.
And I was immediately fascinated by that before I even understood what the state of ketosis was. This was before I went keto. And that's just like a simple food. I put it in my dog's food. It's good for dogs. It's good for dogs with cancer. It's insane to me that some of the most nourishing foods are still demonized in any circles because you know, those of us that live in this little bubble, we think the rest of the world is paying attention, but unfortunately, it seems like a very small layer of the population are in this realm.
Yeah.
And this whole, sorry, but disease, dis-ease, temporary state of dis-ease. You don't cure that. You work backwards to the place where the state of dis-ease began, and you work on making the host, which is you. I am the host, and I can make myself as the host a bad environment for disease to live.
Oh, she's talking terrain theory now. Look out.
Boy. I love it.
Sorry.
No, I mean, and it's, you know, it's funny. You mentioned Dom D'Agostino. He was the driving force in me. I went to a conference in 2017. I'll make a really long story short. I saw him speak, and you know this, Molly. He's so brilliant that,
I love him.
that literally everything he said went over my head. And I remember thinking, I want to know what the hell he's talking about. And that's when I started, and I went to school. I went back to school 11 days later. Because
Mine was similar, except that like I was busy building out a supplement department in Southern California, and a buddy was like, "You got to listen to this podcast. You got to listen to this podcast." And it was Dom's first appearance on Joe Rogan.
Oh, wow.
And I finally listened to it, and it was a holy shit moment of this evolutionarily makes the most sense. And I stopped eating carbohydrates that day. Like I ate sour cream for 3 days, and ketosis hit so fast and so hard because I was trail running that I pulled my car over to the side of the road because I thought something was wrong with my car because like my vision felt different, smells were stronger, I could hear everything, but it was all from that first episode of him explaining the ketones as this primary fuel substrate, this evolutionary fuel substrate.
Yep.
I wasn't trying to fix anything. I played with every nootropic, you know, synthetic and otherwise. And then, wait a minute, I can make this molecule that makes me feel like I have a gear I didn't know existed.
And babies are born in ketosis, and we just lose that ability to have that experience. I had the same experience, Molly, and I remember, as if it wasn't bad enough that I talked too fast, I got hyperverbal.
Oh, same.
Because
Yes.
it's like a light switch. That's how I you know, and I was already relatively healthy, but like that light switch, you feel it and you never forget it. And you speaking on your product, Molly, was funny. So my final day of grad school, I had to take what's called a comp exam, and essentially it's 10 hours worth of exams. So it's 10 exams that are each an hour long, 10 individual exams. It's crazy. It was a crazy day.
That's a lot.
I had a gigantic bag of Keto Brainz. This was before we had even met. I just had your stuff.
Love it.
And and like my French press got me through those 10 hours.
I love it.
And it was incredible. Like no food, because I wanted the ketones because I was performing better with them, but I was, you know, it was like, you know, you needed something as like a nervous habit while you're taking your exam. So and so it was like a practical experience. And then when it was cool, when I got to meet you at KetoCon a couple of years ago, it just like the whole thing kind of came full circle. Your product is fantastic. If people are looking to get away from sugar in their coffee and they want something that's actually going to benefit them too, I just can't recommend it. You know, highly.
Well, and
enough.
that product came out of like I'd already been playing with nootropics and supplements and dialing in all the things when I met keto, and Keto Brainz came out of, you know, you start with the C8 oil and everything ends up in the coffee. And I was opening capsules of what I knew to be kind of the perfect morning stack. And then I heard Don DiAgostino talking about how his dog Scooby had gotten into his container of Quest Nutrition C8 powder. And I was like, wait, there's C8 powder? Like, I totally skipped over the fact that the dog ate it. And, Keto Brainz really was a tool that I constructed for myself after going keto and getting into intermittent fasting and still wanting to leverage all of these molecules that I knew were amazing for other reasons. And that became the morning stack. And when I decided to make it a product, coming from the industry where I was a buyer and everyone was making beautiful products with really bad ingredient profiles, I stuck to my guns in keeping the doses high and in keeping the quality of the ingredients the same quality I would use if I was still concocting it myself, which is challenging because it's not cheap to make, but it's really neat to have created a product where there is no BS. There's no BS behind it. It's exactly that. That's that.
Well, well, thank you, Jay, for introducing it to me. And thank you, Molly, for sharing a little bit of your story. And I'm glad, man, and the commentary that I knew that this commentary that you had on this particular story with the type 3 diabetes was going to be perfect. And on a personal note, Keto Brainz has officially become like a vacation item for me. I'm packing a bag with me in my socks and underwear if I ever leave.
Oh no, I need to send you more packets. You need packets.
No, I'll just take the full bag. It's okay. But Molly, listen, I would love to have you back more often just to talk to nerd out about this stuff because I just learned a lot. But
I'd love to.
Well, we're going to do it. But before you go, yes. Lauren generated a name across all of our monthly sponsors. I sent it to you. So I would love for you to announce it to the ladies and gentlemen, the name generated by Lauren from across all the monkey sponsors.
Oh, the monkey sponsors. That's great. We need some more Keto Brainz.
So they're going to get a bag of Keto Brainz and also a round of silver. And the winner is
we have Renee Nordness.
Renee.
Apologies if I say it wrong.
No, that's it. Renee. Yep. I know that name. She's been a sponsor for a long time.
That's great.
Well, listen,
I just want to say, I want to say one last thing, just because Keto Brainz was a part of the last 2 perpetual health retreats. And I just want to say this, you want to get involved with this company because Molly and I spoke and last year she was ready to ship some stuff out and then they had some kind of like packaging snafu. You remember this, Molly?
Yes.
Yeah. And when
it was always fun.
Yeah. And we were like, well, what are we going to do? They just went above and beyond, still sending the sample packets, creating those little cards that had the Perpetual Health logo on it, this whole thing. I mean, you find a company that's going to go to great lengths to do that, to help, make something that we were putting on more successful. That's a company that you want to get behind. So just to publicly thank Molly and Keto Brainz for just being that kind of a company. We need more companies like that.
There you go.
Well, thank you both for doing what you do and being who you are, because it makes it a pleasure. It's not always this way when you're partnering with friends in the community. So I really appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Hey, the good times only just begun. Thank you so much, Molly.
And thank you.
All the best
Have
to
a
you.
Good one.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
All right. There goes Molly Rucker of Keto Brainz to talk about type 3 diabetes and, of course, a little bit of the backstory, because I wanted to know how the hell all that worked out.
It's funny. I didn't actually know any of that stuff either. And what she said was exactly what I did. I found MCT oil powder for the first time, made by Quest. They must have been the only company that made it. And so as I was unraveling my journey, like in 2014, so now over 10 years ago, I was doing that same thing. I was like putting a little bit of this, and then I'd be like, this is good. So I'm going to put a little bit of that. And I was assembling all those ingredients. The only thing that she has in Keto Brainz that I had never heard of before was alpha GPC. That's super interesting acetylcholine precursor. It's a neurotransmitter. That was the only thing I was unfamiliar with. And so Keto Brainz actually introduced me to that as well. So it was very cool. I was putting all those things in individually, and it's a lot easier when it comes in a packet that tastes good and that makes your coffee nice and creamy without anything else.
Yeah, I'm glad to know I can have it more than once a day too. That's nice.
Yeah.